So, hi guys. So this is the third event of the day. Um, so we have with us Colin Garrow, Paul Toolan, and John Ryder, aka Graham Smith. So if I can find more. So I've got Paul Toolan. Is oh, who's it? Oh yeah, it's Paul. So Paul's first collection of stories was called A View from Memory Hill. He also writes plays. His books are A Killing Tree and A Journey Killing, and they're the first of the Detective Inspector Zig Baton series, are rural noir crime novels with a fair share of dark humour set in the apple orchard landscape of England's West Country. The third, An Easter Killing, is on sale now. And then we have John Ryder now, but most people know him as Graham Smith. Is an international best-selling Kindle author and has 6 books featuring D.I. Harry Evans and the Cumbrian Major Crimes Team, and 4 novels featuring Utah Dorman, Jake Boulder. His Lake series, which is 3 novels featuring DCI Beth Young, has received much critical acclaim. And we've also got Colin Garrow, whose books are Murder, Mystery, Horror, and Innuendo. And he's an indie author of novels, stories, plays, and poems, and he's from the northeast of Scotland. So I'll
northeast of England.
Introduce you to this one, which is called Murder Most Male. So I'll let you guys start.
Okay, well, I'll go first. Currently writing as John Ryder, new series featuring an action Reacher-style hero, Grant Fletcher. Books are set in America, and as well as the stuff I've done under my own name of Graham Smith, I do like the American-style adventures, and I just feel that America is such a vast landscape. You can have the huge metropolises like New York, Washington, Miami, LA, etc. And you've got vast wildernesses as well, such open areas. And that lets me, as a thriller writer, create all kinds of mayhem, whether it's dodging CCTV cameras in cities or running away from wolves in the country. You know, there's so many different challenges that I can throw at my hero. And that's just a little bit about me. I've got the Lake series featuring DC Beth Young. I've got the old Harry Evans series, also set in Cumbria in the Lake District. And I just love writing. I try and write fast-paced, entertaining stories. So that's enough from me at the moment. I'm going to pass it on to Paul next, and then he can have a wee say as well.
Thank you, Graham. Well, I'm just finishing the 4th in the crime series. They've all got the word killing in the title. The first one was called A Killing Tree, and the most recent one is An Easter Killing. There we go. Proof copy. It says so. I tend to write more character-based and theme-based debate books as well. I quite like a reflective mystery approach. I'm not trying to write a sort of fast, pulsating thriller or anything like that. Frankly, I don't think I know how to do it. So I quite enjoy writing the sort of slow-ish, reflective, thought-provoking, intricate plotted thrillers with themes, things like art fraud or conservation versus development, child trafficking, things like that, which demand a bit of research, but I quite enjoy doing that too. So that's me. Colin, over to you.
Thanks very much. Well, I write kind of murder mysteries, but I also write a bit for children, kind of adventures that have sometimes a little bit of murder in them as well, not too much. And I also have a spoof Sherlock Holmes series, which is kind of lots of toilet humour and innuendo, which I started writing just to amuse myself, really. But the main thing is murder mysteries, and I have 2 of those at the moment. Terry Bell Mysteries, which is set in my native Northumberland, and a Rosie Robson mystery, which is set in 1955 in Newcastle. But one of my latest books is a different one again, called Terminal Black. And I wanted to do something a little bit different with that. And instead of just creating another murder mystery, I started writing about a petty criminal who gets involved in a gang who are knocking people off. And because he's stolen somebody's identity, he gets mistaken for someone else and somebody tries to kill him. And kind of goes on from there. But that one was also different because it's a kind of ensemble piece. So it's not just one character all the way through. It's kind of a little bit of this one, a little bit of that one. And I totally confused myself about halfway through because I had so many characters. So I didn't know what to do with them. And eventually started rewriting it and ended up with this ensemble thing, which seems to work quite well. Although I have no idea what the second book's going to be like. I tend to write about amateur sleuths. I know both you guys write about detectives. I mean, Graham, have you any experience of detectives, or is it just something that you felt you're interested in?
Well, I've no real experience of detective works, but I've been reading crime fiction for 40 years, and I like to think that I've learned along the way. I mean, there are so many TV shows, so many books. I mean, just reading a book like one of Peter James's, that could almost count as research because it's so detailed and there's so much procedure, and there's plenty of handbooks out there. I mean, like Kate Bendelow's got one on CSI. Graham Bartlett's got book out. Neil White's got a book for crime writers on law procedures and so on. So there are so many research tomes that you can find, and I do think that because we set the puzzles, it's easier for us to solve them, to have our characters solve them. But in that, I also think that I tie myself totally in knots at times. It's 1 minute I'm thinking this is way too easy, everyone will get it, because I know it. I've devised the secret, how it's going to be revealed. So I'm thinking, no, it's way too easy. And then other times I'm thinking, no, that's way too hard. Nobody's going to get that. So it's all about trying to find the balance between the two and a point where I'm happy. And then again, paying attention to reader feedback when you're having a conversation with them, notes from your editor, even Amazon reviews and everything, if people say they're totally blindsided by a twist, that's brilliant because you've set it up nicely and then you've totally caught them out with it. That's a good one. But I'm sure you guys are the same, that there's so much angst involved in knowing whether you've got it too hard, too easy, or just about right. I mean, from a
problem, isn't it?
Yeah,
I agree with what you're saying there. I think that's a really good point. That point where you don't know until the beta readers have got hold of it whether or not you've put too little a clue in or too big a clue in for the reader, and until the beta readers say, "Oh, I got it too quickly," or "I didn't understand what was going on," you're not quite sure if your own plot is really hitting the mark. It's very difficult to outline with that in mind.
Yeah, I mean, for me as a reader, I like to work out who the killer is, let's say, 5 to 10 pages before the author tells me. That I want to work it out before I'm told, but not so soon as I'm going the whole way through the book saying it's him, it's her, it's him, it's her.
What's your track record, Graham? Then what's your success record there?
Well, it's improved since I stopped reading Jeffrey Deaver's books because they're so twisted you can never get the answer there. But I mean, again, you were saying you find the same thing, and I think for you that's writing more about themes and that as well, Paul, I think that would be very interesting. That's not something I'm sure I would be comfortable tackling, So can you tell us a wee bit more about that?
Well, I like to get my teeth into a debate, really. And so, for example, in the last book, the core of the debate is the conflict between conservation, in this case, an apple orchard. I live in Somerset, you know, which apple country, orchard country, the West Country. So it's a clash between people who want to conserve the orchard and the houses around it, and then developers who want to build a massive estate because people need somewhere to live. You know, and these two social clashes of ideas really throw up all sorts of angst in people, from which crime can often follow. So I think the themes actually generate crime quite all the time, whether it's revenge or envy or whatever. It doesn't really matter. But I do quite enjoy the research part of it too. And so when I'm writing, it's not just about the plot and the characters and the crime and the outcome. It's about the kind of the social milieu of it all. You know, a little bit of kind of rural noir going on here with social comment and things like that thrown in, a bit of humour.
Just picking up on what you're saying there about you enjoy the research and everything. I once managed to get myself thrown out of a church while doing research. Have you guys got any good stories on the subject?
Well, Colin might have. I've never been thrown out of a church.
No, not yet. Well, I was going to ask Paul, where do you get your ideas from? I know that's a question lots of writers get asked, but do you have a specific starting point? I mean, I always start with a title and kind of work my way from there, but what's your kind of method with that?
Well, I have days when I just think to myself, wouldn't it be nice if you could just open an idea cupboard like a fridge and pull out a bottle of milk or something, pour it into the typewriter and start, you know. No, I don't know where they come from. Well, I do. The first book I wrote, the second book I wrote, which was called A January Killing. No, I've got it wrong. The one I showed you, An Easter Killing. It came from, I'm in a walking group, and one of the walkers who lives locally was, because I've only been in Somerset 10 years, so I'm a beginner, you know. She was telling me about this hill, and on Easter Sunday, on Good Friday, every Easter, they erect a crucifix, a cross upon the hill, and the people with religious bent go up and worship. And I thought, oh, and she showed me the hill. She pointed it to me. I thought, that's a really interesting setting, that. So the idea came from that, and the setting followed. You know, the crime follows. If you've got a hill with a crucifix on it, it's pretty obvious what could happen, really, there in a modern context. So I brought in a lot of that, and I quite enjoyed writing that. How about you? Where do you get yours from?
Well, I try not to have too many ideas. And some of the best ones have been with my children's books. Like one of them was called The House That Wasn't There. And I thought that was a pretty good idea to start with, because then I have to explain how a house could be there and not there. But normally I just start with something that sounds reasonable and then carry on writing. Although with one of my Terry Bell mysteries, I'd been reading a book by Michael Grant Collins, and he'd mentioned this kind of underground bunker of something. And I wondered what would happen if somebody was contracted to build this kind of underground room or bunker or whatever it was. So I started writing with that in mind, then realised it just wasn't going to work. So I did a bit of research about a place I used to live nearby, an old airfield, and they did actually have some underground chambers there that they used during the war. So that got me onto a different track, and it worked much better. But that was the only time I've really had a specific idea as a starting point. Normally I just kind of wing it all the way through.
So you just begin writing, Colin? You just start?
Pretty much. I mean, I wouldn't want to know the remotest idea of what's going to happen as I'm going along, because I'll just get bored. And I usually find out the killing like the page before I write it, which is the best bit, because then I'm kind of exploring it as a reader as well, and hopefully getting the same sort of experience that the readers can get.
What about Graham? Do you outline, Graham, or do you just start writing?
I'm a convert. I used to be a pantser, you know, just type the words chapter 1 and keep going until I got to the end. But I recently got taken on by an agent who's been a friend for years, and he's kind of impressed upon me, you know, do the outline, get all your problems worked out. And after having a particularly heavy edit with one of my other books, where the killing at the end of the book that helped solve the case, my editor said, no, that killing's got to be page 1. So I had to redraft the whole book in terms of timeline, dragging the clues out longer and everything. So with that in mind, I now outline to the point where an outline is anywhere between 9,000 and 11,000 words.
Wow.
That gives me a real framework to hang the novel on, but I'll get the outline either approved by my editor at the publishing house I've got a contract with, or my agent who I'm working on other projects with. And then once I've got the green light from them, I'll go for it. But both are relaxed enough for me to send them an email saying, had a better idea. How about if we twist this and just sneak in a wee chapter here to better explain that? They'll do it because they know that I can't be too shackled. But it certainly helps me. I can spend up to 3 weeks getting that outline right. But once I've written that outline, I can write a book much quicker as well. So it's all kind of counterbalances. I would say that with the outline, I can still write a book quicker than I can without, because there's so many mistakes get made. Sometimes you paint yourself into a corner that you can't get out of, or you go back and you read it after it's done and you realise that chapter 35's got no place in the novel whatsoever. You know, and again, it's that age-old author thing. You know, it's the knowledge that we have in here about our characters and our plots and settings. Is that coming through on the page and everything? You know, so you get that. But no, that I find that outlining's definitely helped me, but there is still a wee bit of the renegade in me that I am allowed to veer off from it. It's not a steel cage, shall we say.
Yeah, I don't think I could write if I couldn't retain a little bit of the renegade, because I think, as Colin was saying earlier, there's got to be some fun in it, hasn't there? Really,
there has, but again, I think of the outline as a sketch, and I do the colouring in. I bring that sketch to life, you know. So again, it's all about place, and you know. The framework, I mean, my idea of an outline is the chapter number, the narrator's goal for that chapter, the obstacle to them getting that goal, what generally happens in the chapter, and what I'm going to finish the chapter on as we kind of cliffhanger to keep the reader turning for the next one. Generally, it's 6 or 7 lines per chapter. You know, it's also a good place to put in useful information like £20,000 was stolen from the Dog and Duck, so that you're scrolling through a bunch of 6 or 7 lines trying to find that information rather than a whole manuscript.
With me, I think I do outline. I don't outline as anything like the detail that you've described, Graham, but I have to have a sense of the ending. If I know the outcome roughly, then everything I write goes into that funnel, really, and it all serves the outcome. And if everything going in is pointing towards the ending, then I know it's probably going to remain relevant. So I try to see the ending as a kind of funnel, and once I've got that in my head, it seems to go pretty well after that, within reason.
Yeah.
How do you do it? I'm just going to ask Colin now how he does it if he doesn't have an outline at all.
Well, certainly I have painted myself into a corner quite a few times, and sometimes I've had to just get rid of a couple of chapters to make things work out. And in other cases, I've written a chapter and realised I can't leave this here, it needs to be at the end of the book, because I haven't really told anybody what on earth's going on at this point. So that's meant that I've got a better idea of what's going to happen, but I'm still not absolutely sure. But I don't really want to know what's going to happen until I get there. and usually it is as I'm writing it. And sometimes it's a total surprise, and I'm thinking, how did that happen? And you know, it's one of the characters who I thought was a more minor character, and suddenly they've produced this reason for killing whoever gets killed at the beginning of the book. But the other thing I've done quite a bit is I start with the body or somebody missing or something like that, rather than kind of do what some authors do, where they kind of segue through the main character's social life and all this sort of thing before you get to something that actually happens. I'd rather have something happen straight away than go back to 3 or 4 days earlier and then find out how this has happened. So that gives me something to work towards, but it's still not anything like the ending. And usually it changes quite a lot, so it's completely different anyway.
At what point in the writing of a particular book, then, do you get a strong sense of how it's going to close?
Usually on the last chapter.
God.
It's strange sometimes because I think there's some kind of unconscious thing going on that kind of pulls everything together as I'm getting to that point, even though I'm not very clear what that point is. So it's always a little bit of a surprise, and I'm not entirely sure how it works, but so far it has worked, so it's not too much of a problem. What I was going to ask Graham was, you were talking about writing books set in America. Does that mean you're using American English and American phrases and things like that?
It is, and it can be a wee bit of a culture shock, when you've got to type IZE instead of ISE and so on, but you get used to it. And it's weird because when I'm writing American-based novels, I'm hearing American. It's not, that's the route home, that's the route home. Someone isn't stupid, they're stupid. I hear the writing in an American accent. I've immersed myself in that kind of culture, that way of thinking. And it's quite weird at times when you get that, but it totally works. And what you've got to be careful is not to drop in some very British phrases and so on. Yeah. But I have cheated a little. My hero, Grant Fletcher, is originally British. He moved out there when he left the Royal Marines and married. So he's a Brit in the USA, which allows me the odd slip if he says something British. But yeah, he is British. So.
But he's not a policeman. Is he a private detective or an amateur? How does he go about solving crime?
He's a kind of mercenary, if you will, something of a fixer. In his first case, he is asked to find his friend's missing daughter. She went missing in a rural backwoods lumber town in Georgia. Think Deliverance, but without the friendly locals. And obviously things go wrong, but being ex-forces, he's got certain skill sets that make him a wee bit Liam Neeson. So, yeah, that's there. I mean, America's such a diverse place, as I said earlier. It's great. But what about you? I mean, you said about that hill in Somerset. It sounds like a wonderfully different kind of setting for a novel. There's so much in the UK is done in the cities or perhaps in the wilder places, but rural farming communities, that's a different.
Fascinating. They are full of strange characters as well. Some of whom you meet in the street sometime, really. The first book, which is A Killing Tree, the cover is actually based on a photograph of a little hill called Burrow Hill, which is about 5 miles up the road from me. And it's just a tiny bump, but when you get to the top of it, you could, on the other side, you can see most of Somerset. And I was walking up there one day and thought, what would happen if you walked up to the top and there's a body lying against this single tree at the top of the hill? And that's where that idea came from. But I was going to ask you both about settings, because you were talking about America. I mean, Colin, when you start writing, just typing, do you actually know where it's going to take place? Do you know the surroundings?
Well, my Terry Bell Mysteries series is about a taxi driver who gets involved in a murder. And I was a taxi driver for a couple of years, many years ago, down in Suffolk on a seaside town. And one of the things that fascinated me was, as a tourist, I saw one side of the town, and then working as a taxi driver, I saw a completely different side of it, and very quickly met lots of drug pushers and prostitutes and things, and some pretty horrible people, really. So it was always at the back of my mind to write something about that. But when I did start writing it, I wrote it based in Whitley Bay in the native northeast, which is close to Tyneside and Newcastle and Gateshead. So I had this very specific area, although I don't just use real places. I also have a few made-up places as well. But it's certainly recognisable in terms of where the characters go. And it's the same with my Rosie Robson series, which I think I've got. That's it. The first Rosie Robson's book. And the series is called Blood Time. And again, that was about places I was familiar with. But because it was set in the 1950s, lots of the places that were there then are not there now. So it was quite difficult to find the streets where the characters would have lived. And that was a bit more difficult than I thought, because I had to find old maps and things like that to try and work out where people would have gone and where they would have gone drinking and things like that. But I try and make it recognisable, so people from those areas will be able to say, oh yeah, I know where that is. Which I think is quite nice. If you're reading a book that's set in a place you're familiar with, it's good to be able to share that kind of knowledge with the author. But also I use quite a lot of dialect, which I know isn't necessarily the best thing to do in books, because not all readers enjoy reading funny phrases. But so far I found it, as long as you don't go over the top, it seems to work quite well, and people like the kind of the Geordie humour, for instance, which comes across quite strongly in the books. But I do have books that don't have much in the way of accents. I mean, Paul, in Somerset, does there a specific accent that you use, or do you write in that way at all?
Well, it's an interesting question. In the first book, I've got this detective sergeant sidekick called Sergeant Ball, and he's very much Somerset, and he's got a Somerset accent. And I started to. He can't say sir, because people don't say sir in Somerset; they say zor. And so I wrote it as Zor, Z-O-I. And about half the reviews thought this was really helpful, and the other half said it was awful, got in the way, and they hated it. So I actually engineered in the second or third books for him to stop saying Zor somehow and stay Sir again. But I've grown wary of writing a lot of dialect into the books, because I think American readers, going back to Graham's point earlier, would struggle with it, I think, a little bit. But it does add a lot of character, so it's a difficult debate, that one, I think.
Yeah. I've kind of countered that with whenever I've got someone speaking dialect, I try and have someone who's not from that region in the room, and just have them go, what? And then make them explain it, so that it's explained once and then you move on. So, I mean, in Cumbria, where I've set a lot of books, there's a phrase that Mara, you'll know it, Colin, for the Northeast as well. You know, it kind of means mate, brother, friend, you know, that way. But to someone from Glasgow who's never heard that term, Mara, what do you mean by Mara? Are you talking about a vegetable? You know, you can almost get a wee bit of a laugh going with it. Then have someone explain it. Then use Mara forevermore in that book. You know, because you've explained it. I think with some of the stronger dialect, and you know, and some dialect can be self-explanatory as well. You know, if there's anything a wee bit out there, I always try and have a non-local in the room that needs to query it, even if they quietly pull someone aside. Didn't he get what he was going on about there? Can you explain? You know, and then do that for the reader, but do it once at the start and then move on. You know.
So you wouldn't ever use like a list of meanings at the end of the book just to explain certain words and phrases. I mean, I've done that a couple of times. I found people find it quite helpful. Even Americans who don't really understand the accents, and you don't really understand the explanations of the accents. I think it's a nice little thing to have, just to be helpful or to try and be helpful at the end. But obviously they might not realise that it's there until they get to the end, by which time it's probably too late anyway.
I've never used so many that I felt the need to put in such a glossary. 4 or 5 throughout, and of them, I try and only make 2 or 3 at most needing an explanation. You know,
yeah, I think too many would make it a problem for me. I've cut back. In the first book, I had a milkman, a Somerset milkman character, and one of the beta readers said he couldn't understand 2 or 3 pages, just got lost in it, and I reduced it right down and gave him some plain English instead.
Yeah. You know, you give them a thick accent, you know, have them cropping G's off the end of living or keeping, and you know, give them something that's a regional trait, you know, and a thick accent. But again, a lot of people are of the opinion that if you tell someone a character is from Liverpool, they'll hear him speaking in a Scouse accent. Same with Birmingham, same with, you know. So without going too far into it, you almost don't need to, and then they'll almost even read the dialect in that accent, you know, without getting too far in. And I mean, obviously, you don't want to get into cliche territory. Yeah.
So speaking about kind of locations and geography, Graham, do you use like Google Maps or anything to try and map out where your characters are traveling around?
Oh, all the time. I do that at the outlining stage because I keep a timeline there. So, for example, travelling across from here near Gretna to Newcastle takes approximately an hour and 15 minutes, you know. So having that knowledge is great because you can say they need to get there in an hour and have them going helter-skelter in the car, you know, all that kind of thing. Certainly do it. Use Google Maps to research so much. I mean, the town in First Shot is called Daversville. It is not a real town, but it is based on real towns in that area. I didn't want to blight the citizens of a real town with the fictional one I was creating. You know, I didn't want to say that or have anyone thinking, how dare he say that about us? We're nothing like that. So I did make up the town of Daversville, but I went on Google Maps, Street View, had a look around, you know, certain towns just to draw some of the characteristics. I've seen me, you know, identify 5 or 6 taverns or restaurants in an area and then have a look through the menus online to get an idea of what's popular local dishes. You know, so if someone's sitting down for a plate of food, they'd maybe have a peach cobbler in Georgia or, you know, bratwurst sausages in some of the areas such as Wisconsin or whatever, you know, trying to keep things local, give it as much local authenticity as possible.
Okay. And what about you, Paul? Do you do something similar like that?
Well, a lot of the the books are centered around the fictional town of Parminster. The local river, one of the rivers that runs out to the Severn Estuary, is called the River Parrot. And so I took the Par bit from that. And there's a town called Ilminster not far from me. And I sort of put those two together and added a few bits of, as Graham was saying, other bits of geography. And the rest is history, really. And so that's the fictional town. But I use real places alongside the fictional town, which I think really works for me, because the fictional town allows me to have a bit of leeway, a bit of freedom to write and create and invent. But the sense of veracity comes from all the other real places that aren't that far away from there. That seems to work quite well for me. How about the rest of you?
Well, I mean, I try to include real places so as it has some relevance to people who know the area. But there have been books where I've just made loads of stuff up. Like I've got a series that's set in London in the 1630s, which is a children's adventure. And I used a map from around about that time, which was great. But because you can hardly see any of the actual detail on the map, most of it's just made up. I've put in a few real places that existed, but a lot of it has just come out of my imagination because there was no other way to do it. And nobody, I suppose, can really go back and check, so it's not too much of an issue.
Can I ask another question going back a little bit? You both talked in different ways earlier about private detectives, amateur detectives, police procedurals. I'm in a dilemma now because at the end of the book I'm currently writing, my thinking is that my police inspector is going to leave the force for reasons of illness, perhaps, and become a kind of unwilling private detective of a kind. What's your advice on that? I mean, what's the arguments for and against all this? Whether they stay as police or they go into private?
Well, I mean, I tend to write about amateur detectives because they don't really know anything, and that way they won't fall into the usual ways of doing things that the police would do. Like, if you discover a crime scene, just blundering straight into it and trapping all of the evidence and stuff like that, and then get into a lot of trouble when the police turn up. I think that's quite nice because that's what most people would probably do. Whereas the detective would probably just stay at the door and get reinforcements and things like that. So it's got its interesting aspects, but it's not the way that a detective would actually investigate it. So there's all sorts of things that can go wrong and can leave the hero kind of in a bit of a mess, and quite often he ends up getting to be one of the suspects, even though the detective's a friend of his, and she kind of doesn't really think he's responsible for all this. She knows he's kind of put his big feet into it, and he's involved to some extent, even if he's not responsible for the murder. And I like the kind of dilemma that he has as to whether he should get the police involved and things like that as well, because he knows he's going to end up in trouble whatever happens.
I suppose it's partly because I'm a little bit fed up slightly bored with having to follow the police line, from the manuals and the detection manuals and so on. And after 4 books of doing it, I think I want to do something a bit different now. So I do want a little bit of that freedom, I think. Is that the same your experience, Graham?
I totally get where you're coming from. There are certain things. I mean, if you take him out of the police force, you're going to hamstring him a lot because he's not going to have access to the same forensics. Oh, yeah. His whole way of working is going to have to change. Yes, he might have a mole or a colleague that can feed him bits and pieces, but it depends on who and what contacts, the terms he leaves the police on and everything. It would also depend on cases. What kind of cases are you thinking of giving him? Because all the juicy murder cases will be handled by the police in this country. In America, where you get sheriffs voted in an election in certain areas, deputies and all the rest of it, a lot of nepotism, job for the cousin and all that. where they're not as well trained in some areas, you know, in the rural towns and so on. There might be more scope for a private eye investigating murders, you know, so that's something you need to think about. What cases you could give him. Is he going to focus on cold cases, you know, that the police have not given up on, but have more or less decided that there's nothing they can do? You know, that it's for what things he can do, you know, but again, he won't be hamstrung by police rules, so he'll be able to knock on doors, you know, do as he pleases. It depends on your character. If he's got that bit of renegade in him, you know, whether he's had continuous run-ins with his boss and all the rest of it, it would be easier to set up. I mean, I made the mistake in my debut novel of setting it 3 weeks before the hero retired.
Listen, we could all go through mistakes I made in my debut novel, and we'd need about an hour and a half, I think.
Yeah, but by the same token, with that, it did get me doing some creative thinking, and I managed to keep him on in a kind of consultancy role, easing the new guy in, kind of thing. And but I got I got 3 novels and 2 novellas out of it, and the story's not finished. One day I plan to return to Harry Evans and his story, so there's still plenty of scope, but you might have to get yourself very creative to get something.
Well, isn't that a bit of the fun that what we're actually doing is inventing stuff onto the page, and isn't that part of why we do it, really?
It totally is. It totally is, and I love it. And one of my favourite parts of writing, this is something we should probably all cover. I love the initial ideas process. I've got 2 or 3 really good mates that I can bounce ideas off, and then they'll challenge me. Yeah, but what about this? What about that? And they really, really probe and make me think about my story in different ways. That's the part I love, the brainstorming, and you know, I do it for them as well. What about you guys? What's your favourite parts and least favourite parts of being an author?
I generally don't like the first line, because at that point I've really no idea what I'm going to write about, and it's usually a couple of chapters in before I kind of get into the swing of it again, and I realise that it's actually going quite well. But I think part of it is because it's quite scary not knowing what's going to happen as well, and I quite like that as well, because it's like a challenge in itself to try and work out what's going on, and still make it interesting for the reader without sounding like you know what you're talking about when you really don't.
Yeah,
I think for me, I like the weaving together of little details over chapters after chapter after chapter. So that you think when you're drawing the reader along here, you actually you're weaving a little fabric for them that will get bigger, like you're knitting a sock. You know, at the end you get the foot. But of course, the trouble with knitting is that you frequently drop stitches, I imagine, and it's when you drop stitches when you're writing and you get stuck that it drives me crazy sometimes.
So, Paul, when you're talking about this character who might be doing something different, how far along are you in the planning stages of that, or are you not planning at all?
Well, I've got a very rough outline for the next 2. The one at the moment is called The Killing of Queen Mab. It's a pseudonym for a woman. But the next one will be called Killing Time, because he's retired and he's got sickness pension, and he's doing up a house, and he meets his neighbour, who appears in the book I'm just finishing, has a story to tell, and they'll go into that neighbour's past, and there'll be crime there to be developed. And actually, strangely enough, because I live in the rural communities, this neighbour is an ex-Morris dancer. Right. So there's a bit of humour to be had here, really, as well. So that's that. The one after that is going to be called A Private Killing. And when he decides that he's bored, he's finished his house, he's dealt with a neighbour, he sets up a sort of agency, and he gets visited by a character from a previous book, from the very first book, who's a very posh lady of the area who hates him. You know, they hate one another, but because there's a sort of hatred there, there's conflict, and yet she needs him, and he needs work. So, you know, you put those two together, you got a little bit of dramatic tension there. So those are the next two, I think. How about you two? Where are you going with these?
Well, I mean, I've started to develop these various series, so I kind of need to carry on doing a new book in each of those for at least a little while. The Terry Bell series, there's 4 books out at the moment, so I'm planning a 5th one in terms of I've got the title and nothing else. And I'm also looking at the 3rd book in the Rosie Robson series, but I'm thinking that may just come to an end because the research side of it is a little bit irritating, to be honest, and I'm getting a bit bored of it. But I think it'll be a nice way to end that series, and also because the heroine is got this kind of relationship going with the detective inspector, and so I think they might just go off and get married and live happily after ever and all that sort of thing. But I've also got the next book in the Terminal Black series, and I've got no idea where that's going at the moment, because it's going to have to be completely different to the usual kind of murder mystery. At the end of the first book, the hero has got kind of dragged into this kind of underworld gang, so something probably quite bad is going to happen to him along the line. Hopefully he won't get murdered, so we'll see.
How about you, Graham?
Right, my next release is the 28th of April. It is called Third Kill. Brought out digitally by Bookouture, but via Amazon you can buy paperback copies, etc. And it sees Grant Fletcher travel to Vegas to track down and kill, basically, an assassin who is targeting the heads of all the casinos. But this is the crime gang casinos, not the big ones like the Bellagio and so on, but the ones who are still owned by the mafia and so on. And this killer is causing mayhem because the gangs are lashing out at each other in blame and so on. So there's an awfully high body count, and the powers that be need this killer stopped, however Fletcher can do it. But they don't know where the killer's living and where they're hiding out. They've got no details, and the FBI is bouncing about in the way. So it was nice to get Fletcher into a built-up area and to have some urban settings for him to explore and get in. So that was good fun. I have the 4th book written as John Ryder complete. It will be sent to my publisher on Monday. My editor's there, so I'm hoping for a big thumbs up on that one. And if not, I'll just be doing a lot of editing. That's the usual kind of story. But again, we've worked to an outline. She knows the basis of what the story is. So fingers crossed the edits will be minimal. And then 10 minutes after I press send, I'll be starting to write my 5th book as John Ryder.
So do you find that there's a problem with having 2 different names, or is it something that readers will be able to kind of get into quite easily? Or would it be confused because there's 2 different names on the books?
Well, there's only one name on the book, although I'm Graham Smith, I write as John Ryder.
Oh, I see. Okay.
John has his own website, his own Twitter feed, his own Facebook page. The 2 of us kind of coexist in a brain that's not big enough for one. Yeah, I mean, it's never given me a real problem, but there are so many other authors I know who write under a pseudonym as well, you know, and the publisher that asked for this kind of like name change, it made sense, you know. rather than writing about a female detective set in the Lake District, I was to be writing about a crime action hero running around the States with a gun. Those are two very different kind of novels. One's it's a police procedure where, okay, there's not that much procedure because police procedure can be boring, but the other's, you know, a full-out action hero with gunfights, proper car chases, and all the rest of it. So to create some distance, we we decided to go with the pseudonym, and you know, it's something I'm very comfortable with. You know, I know who wrote the books. You know, so
You did.
I mean, would either of you consider, you know, writing under a pseudonym? Or?
I don't think I would now. I did think about it for a while when I first started, just because I thought it might be better to have a kind of hard man sounding name as a writer, something like, you know, John Ryder or something like that. But in the end, I just stuck to my own name, and it seems to work all right.
I think I'm too old to change now, Graham. I'm sorry. It's an effort to write under the name Paul Toolan. I've got your breadth of perseverance, I don't think. Can I ask another question? You mentioned it earlier, Graham. Body count. How do we feel about body count in books? I mean, what's a good number of bodies in a murder mystery?
It can be as many as the story demands. I mean, I've read brilliant books where there's only been one dead body. I've read brilliant books where there's been 15 or 20, you know, and it all depends on the style. I mean, a lot of the time, if I have a high body count, a lot of it's done off the page, you know. It's almost a case of seeing the aftermath and dealing with that, and then going after the people who've caused the carnage. You know, it's the same with any particularly horrible murders that happen in my books. You tend to find out about them in the path lab, you know, or the coroner's office, rather than, you know, witnessing it. You know, there's no point in gratuitous violence for its sake. So I do that. And I've written books where there's been 1 or 2 killings. I've written books where there's been several. I think if you've got a murder mystery or a serial killer running, if you've got 2 or 3 victims spaced out throughout the book, then everything keeps up with itself. It shows that there's consequences for the hero not solving the case sooner, and that acts as a driver. It's a ticking clock that, oh my God, it's been 2 days since the last murder. The next one's going to happen any day. You know, so I think that's a very big part of it. You know, it's if there's one body at the start and you know this investigation's taken 6 weeks, the urgency's not the same. So, I mean, what about you, Colin? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you can't have people being murdered left, right, and centre just to excite the reader. I think there has to be a reason why people are getting knocked off, and it has to make sense within the confines of the plot. Otherwise, it's just going to be a bit silly. I generally don't have much of a body count, 2 or 3 at the most. Even with a serial killer, it's generally somebody who's going around killing specific people for a specific reason, not just because they like killing people. So as long as it works in terms of the story, I think it's okay. So don't get carried away and just
And I suppose it very much depends on the style of novel that you're writing. If you're writing a cozy murder mystery, one's enough. If you're writing something where there are bullets flying, and there's a gang of people trying to kill one guy, then there's going to be a high body count. If the one guy's the good guy, he's going to have to shoot a few of the baddies just to survive. He doesn't have to be a killing shot with all of them, but it needs to stop them.
I think it depends on the kind of genre, doesn't it, really? The kind of stuff you're writing, as you say. I mean, I tend to write quite intricate plotted mysteries, so a second body is quite a big shock in a complex plot, and it's quite a useful device occasionally to use that. Sometimes some of the books just got one body, that's it.
Aye. Yeah, I mean, it's something I've looked at, introspectively with my own writing. Do I need to have as many bodies in it, or do I need to have some more dead bodies in it, And it can waver, if you have a bad day at work, body count's going up. It's quite simple that way.
I don't think it matters as much to the reader as we think, perhaps. I mean, if you think about Oxford as a site of murders, I mean, Inspector Morse and Lewis have depopulated Oxford by now. There are about 400 people being killed in their brief time.
And Midsummer, it's the most dangerous place to live in the country.
Absolutely, yes. That's why there are so few people living in rural communities. They've all been killed by people like you and me.
So what are you guys thinking about, next 2 or 3 years? Are you planning anything different to what you're doing now, or what?
Good question.
Yeah. Do you want to go first, Paul, or will I?
Well, people keep saying to me, why don't you write a proper novel? I hate that. Billy Connolly. A proper novel, a literary novel. I've got a background in that. And I do actually want to do that. But it's hard enough getting readers for crime mysteries. Readers for a literary novel, I mean, there's so few of them, really. If you don't live in metropolitan London, which I don't and don't want to, it's very hard. So I don't know whether I will do that, but we'll see. How about you two?
Well, I'm just going to carry on what I'm doing at the moment. I'd like to write some proper scary horror stories. I'm working on one at the moment, but it's a lot more difficult than writing murder mystery for some reason. And I think the idea of having to make people scared when they're reading it, which is what I would ideally want, isn't as easy as I thought it would be. And so it might be something I just try once or twice and then drop it and go back to murder mysteries. But it's something I thought I would try just to see if I can get into kind of Stephen King territory sort of thing.
Well, I would like to try a standalone, try my hand at just having a complete novel in one book, no loose ends to be picked up, no characters to be revisited, to completely wrap an entire story up in one book and have those characters finished with drama in their lives. I'm always looking for different ways to challenge myself. I want to one day write a really complex whodunit to bamboozle myself and the readers, so we can see what happens, how that pans out. But no, future's interesting. We don't know what we're going to see, but I can see that Lindsay's appeared back in the group now, so I think she's probably going to want to do a wee wrap up or bring in 1 or 2 questions from the floor here.
Yes, I've got one question from an author, Leslie Kelly, who writes the Health of Strangers book. She says, I do like a quirky private detective. Do you have any favourite non-police crime fighters?
Well, I quite like the American Elvis Cole novels, Robert Craze. I don't know if anybody's come across them.
Oh, brilliant.
And his sidekick, Joe Pike. I'm sure, Graham, you would like Joe Pike.
Oh, I do.
I remembered it. I remember the first one I read, and what sticks in my memory is Joe Pike's answer phone machine. People say, "Oh, we're not in at the moment. Please, if you something important, we'll ring you back. Please leave it." Joe Pike says, "Speak," and that's it. Speak. And that sort of terseness of it. But Elvis Cole, Robert Craig, I'd recommend.
Yeah, I would say Craig Russell's Lennox series. Lennox is a 1950s inquiry agent, as he calls himself. Lives in Glasgow and operates in a shadowy world between the police and the criminals. Brilliant series. He's not police, he's not full on a criminal, but absolutely brilliant series.
I really like one of Owen Mullen's characters, Charlie Cameron.
Charlie Cameron.
I've read most of those books, and I think absolutely great. And it's never exactly what you think it's going to be, which is always good.
I'd agree with that. I'm just about to say the same.
Yeah, I like that question. I've interviewed Owen a few times, and it's quite interesting to listen to hear him talk about, and also like hear his different books, kind of things, from like detectives to like completely with a detective, but from a female perspective, and then the new gangland thriller one. So yeah, good choices there. I think there's a lot of good authors, that do fit into the crime and thriller, but they're not quite actually like a police procedural sort of writer. I don't even know if I could even peg. I know you've all written them, but I'm not sure you would even say that you were a proper like police, like dead, like sort of like Ian Rankin, like, or the traditional like Midsummer Murders, like following the police. They've all got a sort of quirky edge to them that makes them. And maybe that's just how the modern versions are not so like Agatha Christie-ish. They're more sort of like got characters have got flaws in them. So the detectives are not like perfect family men. They're either like alcoholics in their spare time, or they're like, single men living the high life, or they're maybe set in the decades as well, and they're just kind of just trying to think, the sort of kind of like the Life on Mars kind of thing. The kind of like, are they men? Are they the good guys or the bad guys? But they're actually the police kind of style. But yeah. I think Leslie still on. She said excellent recommendation, so I think she's going to be reading. Oh yeah, pass along with your good session. Thanks, guys. Yeah,
Lindsay, could I add another one in the interests of gender balance? Ellie Griffiths, I think, is well worth a look. Very good writer. Dr. Ruth Galloway is her sort of archaeologist character in there. Very, very interesting stuff.
Yeah, and I'll back that up with one of my own. Zoe Sharp has the character Charlie Fox. Female bodyguard, brilliant novels throughout. You can't go wrong with reading a Zoe Sharp book, and they're all non-police procedures.
Yeah.
So.
That's after you've read all of Colin's, Graham's and Paul's books, of course.
Exactly, definitely.
Well, yes. Some things go without saying. Get the plug in.
During lockdown, I mean, books. It's been the first year that my TPR to be read pile has actually not been like books high. Well, I haven't been able to get the library anyway, but it's not been like Kindle high and book high on bins and stuff. It's actually been pretty manageable. That's because I spent I would wake up in the morning and have breakfast and I would just sit and read like a book. So I'm getting through quite a few books on a good to read pile as well. Is it Goodreads or whatever it is, and it counts how many books you read in a year, and I'm like, I'll put 50, and I'm like sitting now at March with like 40 or 30, with quite a few read, and I'm thinking, this is just fun. But I mean, I think for some people it's an escape from everything that's going on kind of style. But it's been lovely to hear you guys talking. Sorry about that. I think my Wi-Fi did something funny when it's knocked it off. It sometimes does that at the night time. But the next event we've got on is 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock tonight. We've got Kirkland Ciccone, who is one of the non-crime thriller writers we've got appearing at the weekend. And he's going to be in conversation with Jackie. We know Jackie Collins, but it's Dr. Noir, so that'll be quite interesting to to hear, because I know he's quite a character. I've been googling and I've heard he's quite a character, and I'm like, oh wow, what's this going to be like? So thank you guys, thank you for everybody that's watching online, and then obviously if you can catch up with all the stuff from the last 3 events, because they'll all hopefully be all posted up tomorrow morning. So I'm just going to end the broadcast.